So we're here with Shirley McLaren today, who is Community Safety Manager at Edinburgh City Council and is also on the SCSN board. But we'll be standing down at our AGM just shortly after our 25th anniversary of Community Safety Partnership Work event. So Shirley, how long have you been on the SCSN board?
So I've been on the board about 4 years now. I've been treasurer for the 4 years that I've been on.
Right, okay, great. So why we're doing these interviews is just obviously we're celebrating this year 25 years of community safety partnership work in Scotland. Do you have any particular memories of what that stand out for you in terms of community safety partnership developments or developments in the community safety sector, and with SCSN in particular over the past?
So I suppose for me, the Antisocial Behaviour kind of Scotland Act 2004 came in.
Yeah.
And that's when the bubble for kind of community safety kind of really kind of rose, I suppose, within local authorities. Because we had some powers to deal with, there was much more around enforcement. And it kind of took you into that wider kind of sphere. And that's when I heard about Scottish Community Safety Network. I'd not really heard about that before. So I think that was kind of the first time that we thought about kind of how things were being done across Scotland wide rather than just in your own local authority. Mm-hmm. So it was a good kind of introduction, good time to kind of hear about what they were doing. And I suppose for me, the big thing was that it looked at Scotland wide, it looked at specific issues that we were all facing, and kind of came out and did some research, did some kind of development work around it, gave you some tangible things to work on going forward. So things like, when I think about it, we looked at grants. So each partnership probably had a budget, because money was awash at that point, really, around community safety and antisocial behaviour. And it was ring fenced, so it enabled us to kind of look at trying new things. And so we had a small grants for the Edinburgh Community Safety Partnership, and we came along, we did some training, we looked at procedures, so it enabled us to put all of that in place around small grants for organisations, and I think that made a huge difference for us. So things like, we were able to put the taxi marshals on, we call them transport marshals, but we put the transport marshals on so that people could get safely home at the end of the night, reduce the fights, all of that. So that helped police, it helped hospitals, it helped the cities, and it helped people in general and the taxi drivers because they felt much safer. The other thing we introduced was, through our work with Scottish Community Safety Network, was, we now call it Street Assist, which is what people in Edinburgh would know it as now. But back then it was I suppose, working with churches and volunteers from churches to go out and engage with people during the nighttime economy. At the beginning, if girls had high heels on, women had high heels on, end of the night their feet were sore, they gave them flip-flops. It was about providing welfare and things. So we continued that through the small grants. And that's been going for probably 15, 16 years in the city now. And it's one of those things that helps everybody, keeps people safe. And most people think about it being for people that are drunk. Mm. And that was probably the first thought that we had, but through working with the Scottish Community Safety Network and the fact that they'd researched what happens in Newcastle and things, we were able to look at it about people in general being lost, losing friends, just needing somewhere to go if they were vulnerable. So we looked at it being much more than just what you would have said was a drunk tank, and that's continued. So, we provide basic first aid for people, we charge people's phones, we're a meeting place for people that are lost, so family can come and get them, or friends, and it's about keeping people safe. So quite often a group of friends will go to a disco at the end of the night, quite drunk. Maybe one of the friends won't get in. The rest are in the door, so that friend's left out there on their own, quite vulnerable. So it's helped kind of with that side. So that for me was the first kind of concept of what the Scottish Community Safety Network could do. I didn't get involved in that time. It was my manager at that time that was heavily involved. And I think in the 4 years that I've been involved, I think it's kind of opened my eyes to what else we can do. So there's been things around attending the community safety partnerships to look at how they're working, what the governance is, what their priorities are. And then as a board and a group of staff, we've been able to look at, well, is that something that's affecting everybody? So we've recently had a load of kind of papers out that's enabled us to look at how partnerships work across Scotland, and you can pick out things from each and every area that kind of would maybe work in your area, where there's maybe some best practice, but it's not quite how it would work for you, you know, and your partners, so you can adapt it a bit. So I think that's helped, certainly for me, develop the partnership. So I don't think Edinburgh Partnership, the Community Safety Partnership anymore, is the council leading it. We now have other partners around that table actually producing reports and taking the lead on things. And I think that's only been since I joined the board, because I thought much more around how the partners can input rather than just it being the council. So I think for me, these are the kind of standout things. And I mean, I know it's controversial, but every city installed loads of CCTV. It's all coming to end its life. Everybody's scrapping about everywhere trying to find funding to do them up. And kind of, we've been lucky in Edinburgh, we've secured some European regional development funding to do it up and to take us to a smart city and kind of that whole agenda. But I think we're all doing it in isolation. And I think kind of maybe there is some work around kind of with the Scottish Government around, you know, do we want to keep our city safe? CCTV is not just about surveillance, it's about protecting people, it's about people that are maybe on the fringes of crime, antisocial behaviour. If there's a camera there, they wouldn't do it. You know, if there's not a camera, they might have. So it's that kind of preventative. And I suppose the big thing that's changed is kind of everything was enforcement, you know. 15, 16 years ago, everything was around enforcement. You know, we need to get these people, we need to get people involved, we need to kind of make them change their behaviour, we need to take court action, where now it's much more about preventing. And I think that has had quite a bit to do with Scottish Community Safety Network, because it's an open, caring environment. The kind of board, the staff group, it's about what best we can do for the community. And that's about preventing rather than enforcement. And I think that's changed people's perceptions, even terminology. You know, we used to call people perpetrators of antisocial behaviour. We now call them persons of interest, because they might not have caused antisocial behaviour, you know. And it's about that change. And I think that for me over the next 5-6 years will be the big focus, is that changing people's kind of perceptions of antisocial behaviour, the language that's used. And I think we've come a long way. We no longer do as much enforcement because there's only a few people that kind of won't work with you, won't kind of look to change and modify their behaviour. And I think one lasting thing for me is that do not expect to ever eradicate antisocial behaviour. It is about changing somebody's behaviour so it's more acceptable, and working with them to do that, that's more acceptable, rather than expecting them to be this wonderful person that has no issues, no kind of baggage, no history, and just expecting them to change overnight. It's a long process, And if somebody can modify the behaviour, I'm happy with that, because I don't think we'll ever eradicate it.
And you mentioned that sort of first that you became aware of like the sort of community safety partnership and SCSN kind of role was around antisocial behaviour in 2004, and obviously a lot more about enforcement then and ASBOs and etc. etc. So, and how that has changed so much with a focus on prevention. And I suppose it's been moving upstream to looking at what are the causes of these issues rather than trying to react to the symptoms.
Yes, and I think we call that trauma informed, and I certainly in Edinburgh we have grasped that kind of with two hands, and we're really focusing on that for people. And it is, I think, in more than what we would class as normal community safety, you know. So we're looking at community justice is kind of coming into the fore, and looking at people that have committed crimes and have been kind of sentenced, or, you know, given a community kind of payback order and things, and looking at what's caused that for them, how can we support them to move on, and working in a trauma-informed manner, where I think we work much better together now than we ever did. So people, it's about them telling their story once, rather than you go to see housing, you go to see community safety, you go to see this service, you go to see that, and you're continually repeating your story. I think it's really important to have that one story, and only one time that people have to tell that.
And yet there are still big problems with that across a lot of services in the health service, etc., with a lot of siloed work and information sharing not occurring, and sort of data protection and whatever laws getting in the road of that sometimes maybe, or...
I suppose for me, I think data protection's not there to stop you sharing information. It's to make sure that you're sharing information in the correct manner and for the right reasons. And I think probably 3-5 years ago, it was kind of, data protection, we can't do that, we can't share that information.
Well, I think there was a lot of fear when GDPR came in, that people thought suddenly they were panicking about sharing anything now.
And I think it's remembering that that's people's information you're sharing, and where it's relevant, needed, and will enable people to understand where somebody is within their life and what their history is. It's okay to share that, you know, as long as you have a justifiable reason, I think. And for me, I think GDPR helped with that.
No.
Because I remember 2005 kind of setting up our first case management to deal with kind of complex casework, and having people round the table and people saying, oh, can we share this? And it was like, well, we've got the person in the room, you know, the person who was involved was in the room, and we were able to share, you know, and that person was able to be there to participate and say, actually, well, no, I didn't quite agree with that, you know. And it was about giving them a voice, but also enabling us to share. And then it was, oh, we need to have an information sharing agreement with this person, with that person, with that person, you know. So all these different organisations you were expected to have individual. And at that point, what we did was we developed the Pan-Lovian Agreement, which enabled us to kind of all stakeholders share information, and it made a difference. I think the hardest bit, and I think I would love to have cracked it, is how can we get out there and say, this is the difference we've made? Because it's hard to say how you've prevented somebody doing something. You know, it's like CCTV. I can't say I've prevented 100 crimes in this area because I've got cameras. You know, where what I could say to you is 2 years ago we had 100 crimes, now we've got 25. You know, but actually how do you then say and confirm, you know, if somebody was to come and dig in I don't have the evidence to say why those 75 crimes haven't taken place.
There was an example of that actually with the drug deaths figures just published there, where to be fair to him, it was a guy who has done a lot to help people with drug deaths, but had been making the point, maybe slightly spuriously, that for all the investment gone into it, it only saved 9 lives, as in the figures had reduced by 9 from last year, whereas actually we don't know. That it may have saved, the numbers may have been 200-300 higher, because of some of the interventions that were taken, but it's difficult to measure that.
Yeah, it's the measurement, and I think, for me, I think community safety doesn't have the same priority since the ring fence funding's gone away. It's moved to the preventative agenda rather than the enforcement agenda. I think that there's much more need to try and get that evidence, to try and keep that agenda and keep that momentum going that is funded at a level that each city needs. And I think that, for me, is the big nut that we've still to crack, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to crack it unless we change people's mindsets around what is preventative and how do you measure that, because I might stop work with a family now that in 10 years' time the children have their own children and there's no more need for social care intervention. Can I wait for 10 years to prove that? Where maybe for 5 generations there's always been social work, children, families, and in engagement with that family. And it's, sometimes prevention takes a long time and it's generational.
Well, sometimes it's probably an ongoing process with people and families that they will need that ongoing support for prevention. I think one of the developments on that, you mentioned the sort of trauma-informed approach that has become a lot more known and popular, and I guess that pulls in as well to community safety and different bits of community safety, so antisocial behaviour or violent crime or different other issues. We're now starting to see a sort of public health approach taken to these issues, which is all about thinking about the environments we create and looking at problems as health problems. So what are we doing to people that is making them behave in the way they behave? And that's been a big change.
And interesting enough, we've after the death of the girl that was killed by the policeman down south, and there was this outcry, and rightly so, across all communities around women feeling safe in their environment and stuff. Edinburgh's got that, but it's really driven us to work even closer. So even things like the Community Safety Partnership, the next one, we've got the planning department coming along, because they need to consider community safety when they're designing, when they're approving designs for buildings, for the community, the landscape, the built environment round about it. So they're coming along to talk about how they're going to include that in and how we can input into that. And actually now we're bringing that in, and I think that's a change from doing preventative work and looking at a city as a city.
So was it the case that before community safety partnerships and community planning partnerships didn't quite interact very closely, and now they are? And as well as alcohol and drug partnerships as well, and all these others coming into it.
I think the one thing that we've done in Edinburgh is we've developed a community safety strategy rather than an antisocial behaviour one, which the legislation says we have to have. So we looked at all the other strategies and so we did some background research into what were the issues, what were the main priorities. Were there any other strategies in the city that were tackling these issues, so that if it was being tackled somewhere else, we'd keep an eye on it, but we didn't have to focus our time, energy and resources into that. Let's look at things that we could, So we've got 3 main priorities rather than 33, 40 that you used to have it's free main because the others are being tackled elsewhere and we have an input now, but we don't need to lead on that. And I think kind of that's changed the partnership and the partners around the table. It's kind of view on how important these ones are, rather than the scattergun, and they all feel included in that now. So for me, I think the partnerships have moved on, and I think that you learn that from finding out about other people, what other cities are doing, and through the work of the Scottish Community Safety Network, I think.
Well, I was going to ask on that, because you've talked about how a lot of different other things have changed within community safety partnerships and community planning partnerships. So, I mean, and you've been on the board for 4 years. I've been with SCSN now, I'm going to 6 years. I think in my 6 years, SCSN has changed quite a bit in how, not just in how we work, which we have, but in what our areas of focus are. What's your sort of sense of it, like, insofar as you can say, going back any further than your time on the board?
Yeah.
What's your sense of how SCSN has changed in, say, the last 10 or more years?
I think it's much recently, kind of since I've been on the board, it's much more around what the members are looking for, rather than being told. I think previously it felt that the Scottish Community Safety Network were telling us what we needed to do, what we needed to change, rather than actually engaging us in the process and what are the issues for us, what's the emerging trends. I think the other thing is there's that wider scope, there's that wider look of community justice, you know, ROSPA being round the table. I think the fact that the board is kind of led by lots of different services that are not just antisocial behaviour or community safety. There's other aspects that touch on that work. And I think that's given us much more of a wider look. I think what's interesting for me as well is the home safety. Kind of that really dropped off the agenda. It's not on the agenda in Edinburgh Community Safety Partnership in that way, apart from we have the Risk Factory where we have the scenarios and people can go and they work with kind of health and social care partnership and things. And I think for me, lots of things like that have moved, so we might not have it on our partnership, but there is a partnership that's dealing with that. So actually we don't focus on that, they do. We'll input, but it means that we're not spreading ourselves too thin. We're able to kind of look at what the partners around that table can actually focus on and actually maybe get a better understanding, look at how we can work better, reduce problems, you know, that kind of stuff, and look at emerging trends.
It was certainly one of the things that Liz at ROSPA said, that there'd been a big change where home safety had dropped off the agenda, and home safety officers now almost, there are almost none.
Yeah, there's not one. I mean, Edinburgh had one, which we don't have anymore.
Yeah.
And that shifted to kind of health and social care, what we would call health and social care now, kind of, can't remember what they used to call, kind of that where they would go and visit people's homes and stuff. And the Risk Factory, where we have the house, so we have a scenario area where we have a house and it's got no boiler and what the risks are. So all kids at primary 7 go there, but also what we've done is we've worked with staff that work in health and social care that go into people's properties. We've done training sessions with them in the environment so that they know what to look for. So when somebody's vulnerable, we've worked with the fire service, and now in Edinburgh, I would imagine it's the rest across Scotland, we have the community safety teams within the fire service that go down and do fire safety checks and all of this. And we've worked with them around previous kind of fire blankets, fire retardant bedding, you know, fire retardant sprays for people that were really at risk. And we've even got free fire, like water suppressing systems, that if somebody's a fire risk, we'll put in a water system that if there's a fire, it will fire out loads of water, but we then have to work with all our housing and all that to make sure that they're in a ground floor, and you know, and that would never have happened before. And things like in Edinburgh, we got even sensors through, so the fire service worked, and we put sensors on the skirting boards for people that use buzz glue, you know, aerosols, because they're really at risk of fire, a fireball happening. So we put that in because gas sinks rather than rises. So we put these in at the skirting boards. So it was looking at, we've worked with them, we've done an assessment, this is the stuff we can do, but actually let's take it that step further to protect not just them, but the environment, their neighbours, all of that. So, and I think probably 6-7 years ago, we might not have thought of that wider partnership. You know, we quite, you think police, fire, council is kind of who you think your main players are around the table. I mean, we've got things like police, we've got voluntary organisations around the table and stuff. We've now even got a councillor from every party, where we used to only have one councillor, but we've got, so that we're making sure that we're looking at everything. And kind of, who else kind of, we've got a lot of voluntary services around the table now, third sector, that we never had before. And we've got the prison, you know, we've got education round the table, we've got the drugs and alcohol partnership round the table.
Well, and I suppose that's another example of where more sort of partnership working in links is that you mentioned the fire service doing home safety visits, but at a previous role I trained fire officers to do alcohol brief interventions. You've now got police carrying naloxone, so that's again working together with health and social care. So it's really a lot of good partnership working there. And
I also think that partnership working, I think everybody now realises that you can't do it alone. You have to work in partnership. And I think that's extended even more than community safety. And I think probably community safety was the catalyst for working in that way, and it's spreading, you know.
And it was one of the things a few years back, I guess, that we did a couple of events on, was the idea of the sort of complex systems and how, you can't just sort of like do a thing and then be able to show the outcome of it, because the system is these are complex systems that have many interactions and moving parts, and everything really has to be linked.
And I think the thing for me around that is you're only one cog in the wheel. And you have to have that whole wheel to make it move.
Yeah, definitely. Just thinking, for the chance to do it, are there any other like major standout things in the past 10-20 years of community safety? It could either be SCSN or in the sector, like that you think was important?
I think for me that antisocial behaviour was kind of given its place, and community safety was given its place in that we could make a difference. And yes, it needed that investment, it needed the kind of opportunity to try things, and given that freedom to do that. I think the focus for me is we've done that, we've narrowed the types of behaviour that happen now, or the level. It's nowhere near how it used to be. And I think we've changed, and the funding's changed, but one of the things I would like to see is that that's retained, because I think because it's not statutory, which it is in England, it's an easy thing to drop. And I think some more local authorities are better than other local authorities at what the focus is and keeping it on the agenda. And I think you only get that from being part of a Scottish-wide network. You wouldn't get that if it was just me sitting in Edinburgh and somebody else was sitting in Perth, somebody else was sitting in Glasgow, and we weren't engaging with each other. And I think the big thing for me is the events where we bring everybody together. And I've really enjoyed the animation side of it, because we can then use that, and anybody can understand it and interpret it, where quite often when you have the written word, people can't always read and stuff, where anybody can engage in that. And I think that's important, because we often forget about the next generation coming up and how they're going to engage with things and what their points of views are. And I think Scottish Community Safety Network have kind of allowed that, and given us tools and opened our eyes to how we engage with things. And I think that's one thing I won't forget, is how we've kind of done that, and it's enabled us to engage with all ages, all walks of life,
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, something that the world is getting increasingly complex and stressful, with information coming at you from everywhere. So it's even just thinking about, do people have the attention span, or the mental capacity to sit and read screeds of documents or reports or whatever? You just want to try and get the key information in a way that's easily...
And I think as well, because we are becoming much more, Scotland in a whole is becoming much more of a mixed kind of nationalities.
Yeah.
We have people from all four corners of the world, if you want to say now, that I think years ago we didn't, but there is, and I think the animation and all of that enables everybody to understand no matter what your language is.
Mm-hmm. That certainly helps towards
and that helps towards that. So, and I think that's key, is how our communities are made up has changed radically. And I think that's something that we've got to kind of embrace more, is how we move on with that and how we engage with that. Bearing in mind people's different cultures and things like that. And one thing I've always said is, people will say, oh, they're hard to reach. No, they're not hard to reach, they're hard to engage. Nobody's hard to reach, they're just hard to engage.
Yeah. And I guess that's something that we could all do better on I think in the third sector, possibly even in community safety, that I think probably the third sector in Scotland is very white and straight and...
Yeah, I mean, you just have to look at the board, and we talked about diversity and stuff, and I think diversity used to be a second thought. There's still that kind of, I suppose, stigma in some communities, but we tend to go out with a consultation, and now it's consultation online, and so we're currently out with a women's safety consultation in Edinburgh. And one of the things that we've talked about is we'd like to follow that in 6 months, and that'll be the winter. So how do we do that? So looking at actually us going out to shopping centres and engaging with people as they're going in, parents at school gates in the morning, or, when they're picking up, dropping off kids at nursery, kids, like as they're going in and out to a youth club, engaging with them. So looking at it, us taking our services to them rather than them having to find our consultation on the website.
Yeah, I would just because you work for a local authority, I'm interested. So if you're not able to answer this, but and I'm making an assumption, then that's fine. But what do you think about the development of participatory budgeting and how that's going, and the potential for it?
I think the councils, well, certainly in Edinburgh, we have the last administration had a kind of target of 1% or 2% of the budget would all be done through participatory budgeting. And I think we've done a bit of that with the third sector around all our homeless services, and there's that engagement for contracts and things. And we've done a bit of participatory budget in LEAF and things. My honest opinion of it is I think it's a great way forward, but my concern is that it's the usual people that will come forward, unless you've got a project going forward and then you gather all your supporters to go to vote. And is it a bit about, for me, who shouts the most or has the most people there gets what they want, rather than actually what does that community need? And I think there needs to be some sort of balance around that going forward.
Yes, we just need to be careful that it's actually enhancing democracy rather than sort of hijacking democracy and participation, I guess.
Where are we going to be? So, like Edinburgh's got their 2020 vision, their 2050 vision, you know, so we're starting to think long term. And I think that, for me, is a direction that we need to be kind of opening the doors for more. You think about where we're going to be in 10 years' time. And I know that's a lot of kind of gazing forward, kind of rather than navel kind of gazing that we used to do. I think there's still an element of that, but I do think we're opening that, and I'd like to see that kind of go forward. I think thinking about where we're going long term, and I know that's hard with funding and all of that, but I think that's an area that we could kind of do much more work around. Kind of, so what have we got? What's coming rolling over the hill? You know, that we know.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, our local councils are elected for 4 years. Scottish Government's elected for 4 years. Kind of Westminster is elected for 4 years. So we have ideas of what they're going to be saying as legislation and stuff. And actually, should we kind of be preparing for that earlier, rather than just when they're ready to come out in consultation? Should we be thinking and planning further in advance?
Yeah, well, one example of that I might bring up is and this is interesting, maybe even just for me to, or for us to get a sense of, like, how do you perceive that this has worked? Because last year SCSN began to talk about climate change and the impact that would have on community safety. Do you sense that was something that we I guess we think we led on it, maybe we did, but I'm sure I know local authorities are thinking about it, have been thinking about it. Is that an area that you think maybe SCSN has opened some eyes on? Or do you reckon that local authorities were already kind of there and we're just joining it up better now? Maybe
I think the thought and the process was there.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure that the actual doing was there.
Yeah.
And I think, like, I know if I write a committee report, if I'm looking to, like when I was developing the CCTV upgrade and stuff, we had to think about what impact were we having on the environment. You know, how could we reduce kind of power consumption? So when we're putting out the tender, we looked at what was the power consumption of this, what was the... So we have much more of a broader understanding, I think, at local level. I think Scottish Community Safety Network looking at climate change in community safety is giving you a focus on that area. And I think the thing for me is we all focus on little areas, but not wide. So Scottish Community Safety Network, we're looking at it through community safety, which is your remit. Procurement, when we're procuring something, we're looking at it through that kind of lens. But I think we're all looking at individual lenses, and kind of, I think, like COP26 and stuff, we kind of, did we miss an opportunity to kind of really get the world and the world leaders to think about how we can all work together and how those little sections feed into the big? And I suppose there's a lot of work to be done on that because we've done so much damage.
Well, yeah, and I guess that the main thing now is probably, like, and this is something for local authorities to think about, is there's a certain amount of climate change now baked in. So it's about adaptation, because things are going to get bad.
Yeah.
And it's a question of trying to mitigate now for some of the big changes that will happen regardless of what we do now.
No matter what we do, yeah.
So it's things about like community planning and thinking about how are we going to adapt cities, how are we going to adapt buildings, how are we going to adapt make changes. It's not just to stop emissions now, it's also to react to the fact that there is going to be a change in our climate.
And I think some of that, Edinburgh's looking at 20-minute neighbourhoods, that services are kind of within that community.
And the pandemic contributed towards that as well, with the changes to our working lives and
I think that
other things.
I know people kind of think, oh, the pandemic was bad, you know, we were this, we were that, but actually what have we learnt from that? So we don't need all this office space. You know, we can share office space. I don't need to travel into the city centre every day to work. I can work easily in my kitchen, you know. I still work. I think that when we were in full lockdown, it was really interesting because I had to come in at CCTV a couple of times. So you actually seen the streets deserted, you know. So I think we've learnt a lot from that. I think there's lessons we could still learn from that. So things like, what advancements have we got out there? So we're looking at CCTV advancements we've looked at for kind of going forward, and what's currently out there, what's coming, rolling over that hill quite quick, kind of. But things like street lighting. So because I've looked at women's safety, we're looking at the meadows, and there's an area of the meadows that there is no lighting, and that was never a problem before. But we need to look at that because there's a perception that you're not safe in there. The reality is there is some attacks, but nowhere near what people's perception is. So actually, if we put lighting in that area, what type of lighting do we need to put in there? So that we're not, because we need to think about the wildlife that are in there, that are used to the dark. We're used to kind of thinking about kind of what light pollution are we sending out, what emissions are we putting out. So what's the best lighting for that area, that because it was always dark, we don't want to suddenly go in and say, ping, we're lighting it all up so that you feel safe. We also don't want to put lighting in that follows you, because then that tells somebody where you are, you know. So it's about that kind of thing. And like in Edinburgh, we've got all the street lights, we're changing all them all to kind of LED lights. They're set at a certain level. We can increase that if we need to. And it's about, so what we've done is we've developed a criteria for when the lights would be increased and why they would be and how long they would be. So you have to apply for that. You have to apply for permission to increase the lights. So that we're keeping and we're reducing kind of that. But there is the opportunity that if there's need, that we can, you know, increase the level of lighting in that area. And I think that's opened my eyes to kind of the meadows recently, has opened my eyes to how we can think about embracing technology, keeping people safe, but also thinking about the climate and the impact we're having on that environment much more. You know, where previously we'd have just come in and flung up 3 or 4 street lights and lit that area so that it took that risk away. Yeah. Where actually now it's thinking about, it's not just about that risk, it's about the environment, the wildlife, you know, all of that. Yeah. Which a few years ago we wouldn't have thought about.
Yeah.
So we might not have thought about that as being climate control. It's about, and the good thing is that I'm not thinking about it being climate control. I'm thinking about it being in my everyday thinking. Yeah. And I think that's what we're changing.